Hey there. Just getting settled, sorry.
Good.
We'll give it just a couple of minutes here. Okie dokie. How's everybody doing today?
Doing good. Doing well.
Doing well.
bit cooped up.
Look at the proper English.
Yeah, what's proper on that?
Doing well. Jeez Louise. I don't know. I'm from Alabama. Doing real good.
Oh, I'm sorry, that was me. I dialed and I connected to the Alexa as well. So hi, I'm Shubhra. I'm joining for the first time.
What you said your name is Shupra?
Yeah, Shubhra.
Good. Good to have you. And I'll post the HackMD in here for everybody if you don't already have it. So most of the notes are done here on this HackMD. So switch to the gallery view, Brady Bunch view. All right, I think we can go ahead and get started. And I think it's already doing the recording. I'm still trying to figure it out now. It's like recording it to the Zoom cloud, but I haven't been able to. I haven't posted the past couple of recordings, so I'll figure that out at some point. I'm going to do that.
Hey. Can't find my baseball hat, so I'm back to this hat again. Oh, you got the fancy there.
Oh, I got a hat for you too, man.
I was trying to look online to see if I could order one. We had these boards made up that are like the little balance boards, and it's got our logo on it. And I need hats for these also. Things you try to do when you're sitting at home and need to find some way to keep busy. Hey, Phil's got a hat too.
Yeah.
It's never going to be as good as Mike's, though. Oh, Mike.
Oh, he's actually. Wait, I have one in my closet, I think. Go get that out.
Maybe get a ring light, though, for him. Maybe instead of the ring light, above, we'll actually put it on the brim of his rim.
I need to go find mine from OpenStack Summit, Austin.
Impressive, Mike.
See, Josh's young enough to have lots of hair, so he doesn't need a hat.
Becoming a hat.
All right.
All right.
Enough of that.
Well, it's good to see everybody on the call. I know I've been on a lot more. In some ways, everybody staying at home has been a little bit more status a little bit of status quo, but it's been kind of nice to have like social chats and involved interactions. So glad to see everybody here. And honestly, I'm pretty open to if we just have like open hours for people if they want to be able to chat at various points or when we're working through things. I'm keen for that. I know I've done it for some of the teams internally and some of the communities externally that I've been working with over the last couple of weeks, just to have like an open line, like a video chat like this, if folks want the background noise or pair programming or whatever. I'm game. So it's an open invitation. Just reach out. So we'll go ahead and jump into things. Josh, you are the first item on the agenda again. But more good stuff. Lots of good reviews lately. Oh, and you're not audible either.
Oh, how about now?
So
Yep.
I'll let you kick it off.
Cool. So I just wanted to share briefly where we're kind of going with the conformance tests. So there was a discussion about a month ago about how the conformance tests in their current state were not forgiving enough for registries not having specific feature sets. So certain registries, for example, ACR and the open source ones, I believe are trying to target all endpoints that are described in the spec, but other ones, like for example, I know Derek mentioned like Docker Hub, they've explicitly said they're never going to accept blob deletion. And so what we've done is we're in the middle of making some changes to the test source. But what we've done now is we've changed it to run 4 major categories: pool, push, discovery, and management. And so now the tests have been, and this is still not up for review yet. We're still working out some of the kinks, but the higher level of the tests is now those 4 categories. And it's the objective is that if you pass pool, you're considered conformant with the spec. And so maybe we need to update the spec. If everyone agrees, we'd update the spec to reflect that. But this is now, so I shared this in the HackMD under the topic, but this is a branch of that OCI.bloodorange URL called split tests. And that's the same name as the branch for the new test source, if you want to check that out. But I've added a column here, tests enabled. So explicitly, you can now say that you want to run specific tests. So here's how that looks. You basically say OCI _test _ name of optional category and set that to 1. And that will cause the test to trigger for those categories. And so, for example, we just have everything still red. Yeah, I mean, there's, I think, issues in the tests and also issues with the spec and the registries. But we know, like, this is what, at least what I understood, Derek, to that Docker Hub would support. So I put this here, and I know from talking to Steve, they're targeting support for everything. But everything else I put pool. And if you open up, here's an example of what the updated report looks like. So now we have a skipped, we have a categorization for skip tests, and that can be, no matter how high that number is, the test could still pass as long as there's 0 failing. And now all of the tests have been kind of segmented into their own sections. And if they're not run, everything's just gray. So still all the registries are not passing the test, so maybe we need to update the tests. But yeah, I'm just trying to kind of like get feedback on this approach. And There's some other idiosyncrasies too, like for pool, like if you're only enabling pool, we have this setup section, and the setup section tries to populate the registry with a single blob and a single manifest. But if you really only let get and head requests to your registry, this is not going to pass. And so there's a few other extra environment variables that you can set, like OCI tests, blob manifest or blob SHA, and you can give a registry to the test that's already been populated with a blob, and you know the SHA of that blob. So there are ways to do it with complete no push enabled, but we're still seeing a lot of red here.
Is the idea that's the one that you have to create the repo first? Is that what you're getting at, or?
Yeah. Well, so let's say like there's a registry that's completely read only, and we'd consider that compliant, but the tests are sort of like destructive. So the setup tries to push stuff into it, but we have a thing that checks if you provide the SHA of the blob and provide the tag name of the manifest or whatever it is. Peter's on the call too. He can kind of walk through this more, but if you provide a certain set of environment variables, it won't try to do this setup and populate the registry for you.
I guess I'm asking based on that, I'm asking a different question. Like there's certainly some registries that are pull only. I'm pretty sure IBM has one. Like we have the Microsoft Container Registry where no customer is ever going to push to it. I don't know if it even needs to be tested per se, because it's not really a customer registry. But there's like Docker Hub. Are there any registries that would be tested that fall in the category that you wouldn't be able to push to? Not the public, obviously, but what I'm getting at is the test really that I don't enable push, but I enable push, but the repo has to be created?
I mean, I think there's configurations that you might want to test here. I mean, here you're just testing all the registries and assuming that you have full control over configuring the registries. But yeah, the categories you mentioned, they're kind of, the registries are acting more as a kind of read-only cache or kind of some sort of proxy. So, I mean, we want to be able to test those configurations without having to rely on being able to push stuff up. But I don't know of any like software that explicitly only supports that.
That's what I'm getting at. Is there a registry that we would test that is pull only? Like Docker Hub, we're testing because customers want to be able to push and pull from it. The fact
I guess one of the
beforehand is a reasonable expectation.
I think one of the things we ran into is that there's I think 3 different types of pushes, and so I don't think all registries have full support for all 3 of those pushes, and maybe. And I think, so we're considering if you don't have support for all 3 of those, you don't have support for push, at least in the current state. So we can break this down even deeper and, enable individual sets of tests. But like, I feel like from a high level, when you're talking about like certification against OCI, like, I think you want these, like, at least the simplicity of the 4 categories, whether we categorize them differently, but just a few categories.
Fair. Like, I don't know what the 3 different types of pushes are. You're talking like manifest, index, and just blob?
So,
there's a streamed upload, patched upload, and monolithic upload.
Okay. I hadn't really thought about that level of detail, but is there, what I'm getting at without going into too much detail on any one is like, we talked about these high level categories and like sub features underneath them. So there'd be push and then there'd be like 3 bullets underneath in this case. And here, my concern is I'm almost hearing like, we don't want to do the hard work to clean up the spec and make sure the registries are compliant with it. And we're just going to make the tests represent whatever teams are doing now.
Yeah,
I think we want to clean up the spec and find the gaps. Like I clicked on the ACR one. I noticed that we're returning a slightly like a +1 on the response code. I'll go look at it and figure out why. We can go fix those. Like those should be easy things. If there's other things that are bigger, then let's figure out what those are.
Yeah, I'm not quite hearing it that way. What I'm hearing is that in order to do the pull verification test, you need to be able to push an image. Mm-hmm. And the way it's currently written. right?
Is that a bad thing?
I mean, certainly there's alternatives, right? We could have some kind of configuration.
Well, I think the reality is there's a large gray area of, is this, if I have a client that is OCI compliant, can I talk to this registry or not? And if we're just trying to, give registries like a gold star to say like you're compliant, then, that's one thing. We need to strictly define what compliance means. But in terms of like whether or not this registry is going to be able to work as an OCI registry, that's another thing. Like the 3 different types of pushes, like many clients can handle if one of those types isn't supported. But that's the kind of thing we need to define. Like what does it mean if something's not supported?
Mm-hmm.
So
like we said the other day, that blob copy, what was it? There was something we discussed the other day that we may or may not want to support, and we'll leave it up to a registry. And that, I like using the repo creation as an example because it just, I think everybody agrees it's a perfectly valid thing. But I'm sure ECR doesn't want to be listed for pull only. Like they want to have the other ones listed. So how do we do that? And even to the point of the status rating, I'm pivoting a little bit, but it's an example of how I'm thinking that those 4 categories are listed, is each one of those 4 has its own pass or fail. So it's a little more interesting to have, 4 pass or fails individually for push, pull, discovery, management. Then there's one thing missing in the whole thing, and the whole thing has a big red X.
This is Ram here. So to expand on what Derek said, right? So I think a good summary would be, on the x-axis we have all the registries, on the y-axis we have these workflow tests, but there is a z-axis on which there are clients, and real work gets done when we find some sort of an intersection on all these 3 axes.
Is it really a client? Like, wouldn't the clients have their own matrix on how they test, how they compare it to the OCI spec? Like, it'd be kind of cool to have a 3-dimensional printout, and we all give everybody goggles to do this. But is that really what we're trying to do here? We're saying this is the registry compliance list, and if there's a registry client test, then we could do that matrix as well.
Well, I guess I'd like to separate a little bit. Like these are just conformance tests. These are telling what works and what doesn't work on a registry. Like, it's not trying to define whether or not a registry is compliant. Like, if we want to have conformance tests, then go through and have like some list of compliance. Like, honestly, I'm not too concerned about the compliance. I want these tests to be as kind of detailed as possible so that we can push it against, or we can point it at, the registry operators can point it at their own registries. And I really want to integrate this as part of like the distribution CI, so that it's something that we can run and see when something's not working correctly. I think that's kind of a different problem than compliance.
Sorry, I said compliance because it's on my mind for workday work. I didn't mean to say compliance. So conformance was the right word. So I think we're saying the same thing. I used the wrong word there. But don't we want the conformance for each one of those as part of what I'm getting at? And then can we figure out how do we not have to tweak the test so much so that I can figure out how to get it to green? But the reality is, a client that's trying to interact with this thing, it doesn't support some particular operation, so it's going to fail. Like, I'm hoping that we'll all get to green, not just because we're trying to get to green, but because at least everything I see here, with maybe 1 or 2 differences, are all people that are actively involved in this. And we're not just trying to get ours to green for marketing reasons. We're trying to get it to green so we can say, hey, we finally got the spec to a solid state that we could declare it a 1.0.
I guess it's more like green is different than just like, is it working? And yes, I think in the future, we love it if every registry's OCI, it's passing all the conformance tests, but like, it's just not it's kind of a fantasy to get to that point. I mean, we've had this specification out for a long time. This is the first time we're actually writing conformance tests and pushing it out. But what we want, I think, from this perspective is, like, previously the standard that registry operators were coding against was Docker, which itself wasn't fully implementing the spec and not always doing it correctly. So that we actually have a conformance test that's fully utilizing the spec correctly so that this itself is something that registry operators can go and test against. And having as much data about, you know, what doesn't work is, I think, really useful here. Like in terms of like green and red and, you know, some things having all these like subclasses. I mean, it's just useful information. I don't know. It's not bad. I'm not sure what the actions you can do based on them are.
Yeah, the action might be to fix the spec with a PR, or it could be to fix the test case, or right. I think we have to work each issue independently, right? I do like
the delete. I don't know if delete falls in management, but like the delete one is a great conversation for us to. We should have, if it hasn't already happened, a good breakout on how do we want to handle tags and manifest. What do we think the spec should actually say, regardless of what we've each implemented? What do we think it should? If there's work for us to do, then we'll go off and do that work. And if there isn't, there isn't. But having it just be this big open bag, that means that somebody trying to write a client is not going to be able to write a consistent client across registries. Is that really the success that we're trying to get to here?
Well, yeah, I don't want to defer too much from what Josh was asking in terms of feedback for the for what he was showing. I think that initial breakdown I think is useful. Yeah, you said the delete is under like management. I think we can have that conversation kind of separately about
it does
what does
fall under
management mean.
management. Yeah, I mean, listen, like I think that the spec itself is, if I'm being honest, just a little bit complex, and I think if you just change some of the language, no, I see Vince's face there. No, like I think if we change the language or like chop it down a little bit, and I think we can write the tests a little bit more. I don't know. Maybe to do a little bit less, and it would be easier for people to conform to the spec if it was written or reorganized in some way.
Yeah, maybe if we have those categories, we can put that in the top section of the spec as well. Because
go ahead.
No, go on.
I was going to say, we're happy to take a stab at modifying the spec if people are happy with this breakdown. But we're trying all sorts of things to get other people green and see what's the common, what are the common endpoints that everyone kind of uses.
As far as I'm sorry. But as far as the breakdown is concerned, there appears to be some disagreement about push. Obviously, you have to be able to pull in order to be considered conformant. But it seems like the consensus that delete is optional. Is that the case?
And I don't know if delete was optional as much as there was a debate on how delete should be implemented and so forth. There was a debate on the tags and manifest and so forth. I mean, I think
delete, delete manifest and delete, but
delete blob.
I feel like delete optional was confirmed. It's just like what errors should be reported as like unsupported or what. Like when you hit that endpoint, that it should return certain things.
I think it might help, Peter, if you define what pull, push, discovery, and management were. Like just put a little paragraph on each one, and that somebody could read. Like I just assumed pull is pull. I didn't realize
we actually have that in a state. I'll link it here if you want to read it.
Or just maybe then just pop it onto this page. So here's what each one of these mean. And because I wouldn't have thought that pull is 3 different categories, and management, I can guess what that means. But, and I think by continuing to iterate through that definition, we can figure out what are the gaps. And I think that's the point that I'm trying to push is we know we want to make changes to the spec. Let's use this as the forcing function on what we should change the spec to get it in a solid state.
Yeah, and we're happy to propose something in that direction. I see that PR being open for a long time. So figure it's worth talking about first. But I don't want to take the whole call. It's almost 30 minutes in.
Oh,
But I can send an email with kind of overview of what we're talking about to the list.
Yeah, 22 days. That's just the issue. Hold on, which PR?
Yeah, which PR has been open? Yeah.
Oh, no, I'm sorry. I might have misled. I meant we're happy to open a PR against the spec.md that we think would be sort of like an overhaul and categorization of these things and making certain endpoints required versus optional. But what I was saying is I have a feeling when we open that, if we don't discuss it first, it will be open for a long, long time.
Oh,
I just
no,
think
I'm
this
good
is
for an
a hard
overhaul.
conversation.
Like that's one of those things that I'm actually been itching for some kind of a working session. I'm
Okay.
sometimes so ADD that I have a hard. It helps me just to have folks working on stuff at the same time, and I can get out the axes and like clean stuff up. But that's kind of like that kind of leads into the other bullet point I have of like wanting to get a release candidate 2 out the door. Because I mean, like the other day, I never look at the readme.md on the distribution spec. I look at it and it's like, this thing is exactly from when we created the account and created the repo.
Yeah, as currently written, I don't think any of the the requests are required. What's required is that if they're provided, they have to work in a certain way, like the get, the push.
So,
Josh, did you find any place where the spec is vague and the response codes is supposed to specify? Like I've seen that we are not returning a response code. Or do the other registries return the right response code as outlined in the spec? Like there's 2 categories of the spec, I think.
I defer to Peter, my expert on response codes.
Okay. But I guess I'm looking
can't
for
recall offhand,
categories. There's go ahead, Peter.
The spec is definitely messy regarding the response codes. So that's all I know offhand.
Because we had an issue, I think I might have opened it a while ago, of hey, do we want to break up the spec into something similar to the image spec? So it's a little, instead of this being this really, really
So not to cut you off, Steve, but how about this? We'll take a pass at the markdown file, open a PR. I think from there, maybe Vince, we can have the working session about the overhaul.
Sure.
But like but I'm just saying to have that first pass out there versus just going into a working session. Or we can do a working session to open the PR, whichever.
If you think that you can make a first pass at it, it's sometimes a little bit daunting because especially when I look at like the return codes and how it's formatted, and Derek can vouch to this, of like effectively the current content that is there has been through several different iterations of types of markdown and HTML and embedded tables and whatnot. So sometimes even just
auto generation.
Yeah, auto generation. That's true. Holy crap. So some of what you're seeing that's just like, is it indented? Is it which layer? Like, would it make more sense to just have like an error code section and then just have, any given method say it uses this, and it just like link down to one unified section. Would that be cleaner? Probably. Like
you can definitely have more than one file.
Like we could have like an errors.md and like everything would just link over to that one. The benefits and drawbacks are that right now every section has kind of a clunky, like we have an overview and then a detail, and the detail has a lot of copy pasta. And so breaking it out would be nice. I am 2 ways about trying to generate a PDF. Hopefully, I don't know if anybody's going to want to do that, but it did make generating a unified HTML and PDF of the spec a little bit more difficult because none of the links line up when we did that for the runtime spec and image spec. But whatever.
Do we need an offline PDF at this point?
The people that wanted it were not ever involved in the calls. It was almost like some of the OCI members, people that pony up money for the OCI Foundation to be a standard, wanted offline, like a printable PDF. And I was like, right, okay.
Are they still around that we care?
Those are questions that I whisper. I don't know. They keep me up at night.
Being recorded, but whatever. I guess there's two categories that I was kind of thinking of. There's one.
My point was saying I'm okay with it being split, but it's just whatever's cleaner and like formats nicely or is like a good user experience when somebody's browsing it.
So I'm just trying to break this up into something manageable. Like there's the format, which is what we're talking about here, which is always it doesn't change the content per se, but the format. We definitely want to clean that up. But are you finding that there's just information missing? Like this API is not clear about what response codes it should have. That's what I'm more trying to drive towards.
Well, some cases, the formatting's actually led to inconsistencies because they said there's like the overview and the detail. We've had many cases where those weren't the same. So every time we split something up, if it's not linking to one source of truth, we end up with like the spec saying two different things based on which section you're at.
So by reformatting it, you're going to force the fixing of errors.
Yeah, I mean, it could, like,
Okay.
if the auto generation was supposed to help here, but it actually made it worse because it was based on the code was different than the overview, and then the detail was getting auto generated, and that's what led to all these inconsistencies when we copied it over to OCI.
So I guess so can we identify where it's inconsistent first, and then we could at least write the test? Because then, like for me, from ACR perspective, I don't really care what the format of the spec is. I just want to know if we're returning the right error code. And if we can identify what the right error
that's some
code.
of what, if I got Josh and Peter right, that's what they're seeing, like trying to group, like seeing so much red. Are they generally consistent in where they're failing? So that's to me is like if they wrote the test of the spec and everybody's failing it consistently, in consistent ways, then we need to update the spec.
Yeah, and it was challenging to write the test based on the spec because of that. So I think if the spec was clearer, the test could be clearer and more succinct.
That makes you an expert. Pushes are accepted.
All right. We'll
Josh,
propose
is it
something.
realistic for you to write down what the specifics were? Like if we had 6
The issues?
Yeah, like what specific 6 issues or 7, whatever it is. This section was not clear because of this. And then we're like, okay, let's go fix that one. If we realize to fix all 6, we just need to reformat the whole spec, that's fine. But I think we're missing the gaps of the clarity.
Yeah, so me and Peter will sit down virtually, and we'll come up with a bullet list of everything that was kind of hard to grok, and from there propose. So we'll come up with the issues and then a proposal also of how we would address it. And I think I think like Vince's idea of like breaking it into multiple files and doing this type of thing, I think is the answer. And I really don't think it's too far off. Like it's just that there's a lot of duplication and a lot of inconsistencies, and it just seems larger than it needs to be for the front page. But I'll open an issue.
Cool.
Happy to move on and carry on in the list. Sorry.
If you have a working session, you can feel free to invite me out.
Yeah, that would actually be great.
Too.
That would be great. Thanks.
I think I was the next one on the list with the, well, actually technically it's Vincent's, the extension protocol. But I just wanted to see if there was any more feedback that was needed on that one, or if we had some sort of consensus on what that should look like. Yeah. Vincent, you want to talk about it?
Sure, because it's like, okay, so for those watching at home, it's the pull request 111 on the distribution spec. It's obvious this is clearly not ready for being merged. It's just a discussion piece, but the topic here is, like we've talked about so far, having some way that we could have additive things to the distribution or registry API, to not mess with all the stuff that's currently being done as part of like core conformance, but might want to add later, like it's come up in the Notary V2 stuff about being able to say, show me all the signatures that have, you know, signed or attested this particular container's digest, or something like that. So you could have like various extensions added to the registry. How do you expose what all extensions are supported? How do you give, like, if this is the name of an extension, how do you link back to the documentation about that? Another one would be like Joey Shore's pub sub events piece. So the current approach that is up for discussion here is to have like an extension directory where there's a README with basic layout information, namely having a table that would enumerate the extensions that have been merged into this OCI repo. This kind of falls outside the versioning, so as these things might get added later, it doesn't bump the OCI version per se. And it would, adding a new extension would be adding a markdown document, you know, opening a PR with a markdown document in a certain pattern so that it would describe the name. So you could see it here in this table of its key, and the documentation explaining that key. So when you hit that API on a server, you could get a list of those key names, and know correspondingly what documentation it is about that API. This is kind of in the approach of like feature flags or, you know, Python PEP or Kubernetes KEPs, but it's mostly like feature flags so that you could see additional features that you might like or want to implement in a registry, or see if the registry you're talking to implements it. And yeah, there's been a little bit of comment on it, but it's been over the last couple of weeks and has kind of died down. So if anybody has particular comments on it now, I'd love it, or if you just get to the PR itself and make comments.
So do you see a client in this case? Say you're a Notary V2 client and you want to see what the registry supports signatures. The first thing you would do is do a head request on this MD file for the signature extension and see if the registry supports that. Or like, what do you see that?
So I guess I haven't updated this proposal with what we've chatted about recently in the Notary channel. Where was that? I don't even know where that was now. Slack, maybe? I'll type it in the notes here. In the HackMD notes. But effectively, they would do a head or a get, I guess, on that /v2. So whatever your URI prefix, path prefix is up to that point, but /v2, and then you Derek, preferred something like _ ext /, and so on that root path of that ext would return maybe a dictionary or an array, I don't know what, that would enumerate the names of these things. It could be a dictionary with more information. You just take the keys if you're interested, or bigger data if you want. But effectively a head on that. And if it has that extension, if it returns back something in there, not a 400 or not a 500 on the _ extension, then it supports extensions. And if it returns in that body a list that includes the name of, you know, the key that you're interested in, saying this one's SIGs or whatever, I don't know what, then you should be able to assume that it implements what you're the corresponding document that you've written to. That is the assumption. That would be like the step for an extension client.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. I was just trying to separate it a little bit from what we talked about, like kind of like a versioning discussion. But
yeah, and so that could get into where the name of, like, if say we say like now SIGS is your name, and so now that extension's prefix is /v2/_extension or ext /SIGS. And so any APIs it talks about are all with that prefix. And if at some point that maintainer of that thing says we screwed up, then they could make a sigs.v1 or whatever, sigs.v2. And so that's kind of one of those, like, versioning is hard, but it would all be to that prefix. And if it's just officially deprecated and they move on, then registry maintainers could choose to, like, not have to keep around the old one. I don't know. That is a commitment and a decision to be made, but I don't think that's anything new to anybody that has to deal with API lifecycling.
So my comment related to the underscore, that was just, that was kind of something we decided early on. We knew that was going to be a problem. So when we added other registry-wide endpoints, they had to start with that underscore, because that's something that's disallowed in the namespace of the actual repositories. But otherwise, I think it's fine what you described. I think that's perfectly fine to do. Just from like a client perspective, I'm just trying to think of, registry clients tend to come in with zero knowledge. Like with the conformance tests, there's some level of configuration in order to support push, but like a lot of times the clients come in like zero knowledge, like somebody just put in this endpoint into your starting up some container and some Kubernetes node, and it's never talked to that registry before. Like it doesn't know what extensions are there previously. So having to, every time you're going to use Notary or something, you might have to do this extra request in order to see first whether it's supported. But I think that's the way we have to do it, because any sort of discovery protocol, I think if we did that later on, to not just discover the version of the extensions, but the version of the registry, maybe we can add this in there as well to save that extra round trip or something. But that was the discussion I wanted to keep separate. So I think it's fine to lay it out in the URL here.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Move forward with that.
All right. So does anybody else have any pressing questions on it? Otherwise, I'd say go to the PR and have that commentary, and probably within the next few days I'll polish that up into something that's actually, because I've got like XXX markers to be determined stuff, but mainly it's just a conversation piece.
Yeah, and I'd advocate for just having a JSON object return from the ext root with the list of them or something.
Yeah, the only reason I was thinking of like a dictionary is that, like, if all the keys are the names, then you could marshal that pretty quickly and not care about the rest of it. But if each key had a value that was like a URL back to their doc or something, I don't know. That could go two ways, but yeah, I was thinking of pretty much a JSON object. Yeah. Okay. That's that. The next topic is really Chris and Sek's topic, but Lasker, you've had, I think it was actually originally your ask. Chris A had some graphics created for various use and places. and there's a link there in the TOB issues number 65 that's open for comment. I think we're on version 2 now. Lasker, do you have anything you want to say about that?
No, it was just that. And I think it was just a matter of, do we capture all there's two things. One, how do people feel about the individual images? I think this round 2 looks awesome. I had the same question around the pipeline one. Was the only one that I really thought was something to tweak on a little bit more, maybe the source artifact. But more importantly, because we can continue to tweak on individual ones, are there any ones that people feel that we should add? Because it's kind of like having a contractor in the house. There's somebody actively working on this. It's easy for them to crank out another one. But once the project ramps down and we're like, oh, I wish I had one more icon. It's a lot more to get it spun up. So there is a PR there. They've been super helpful in coming back. It takes a week or two, but they come back and looks like they incorporated all the feedback I asked for. So, but the PR's there. Please ask. I haven't had any other conversations that aren't in that thread there.
Cool.
How do people feel about it? I mean, is this something that they would use? I guess you really get a ton of feedback from people on it.
It's hard to say. I mean, like, I'm usually only get around to these kind of things once in a blue moon when I'm like, oh, that is how people make like fancy presentations that do much better than my like black text on white background slides. So I will try to. I'll make an earnest effort to give a review on that.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my perspective is, while I haven't done a lot, sort of the open community on this, that's required me to have access to that. I do know that I couldn't use, the IBM official ones that our designers have drawn if I was going to draw up something for the OCI. So in that sense, I think it makes sense. And hopefully, I don't think this work is probably scope of the OCI. I assume we can use this for CNCF stuff or whatever, it could be viable for a lot of future uses where we need generic, imagery for architecture diagrams or whatever in the future. So
cool.
Okay. All right.
Although
So then,
Josh asked an important question: is there going to be a Steve Lasker icon in the chat?
only if it's
I
got
can't
this
do
hat.
my presentations. I can't do my presentations without that.
I've already seen one of your presentations where you.
No, I had to use a real image of you, and I.
Oh,
What's next on the agenda?
I haven't used my Steve Lasker background today. Here, let me go switch. There we go.
Actually, can you send that to me? I need that here.
Yeah.
Holy crap! Wow. How did you get that?
I'm going to plead the fifth, but I might have been bored one week on our OCI call and screenshotted his office.
That is remarkable.
That's amazing.
Yeah, that next topic, the next two topics really. I'll the runtime spec. For those curious, we had put up a vote a couple of months, or I put up a vote a couple of months ago, and we'd gotten 4 out of 8 responses on it, upvotes, but per the charter and various docs, they required 2/3 quorum. So we had revisited some of the maintainers that were on that list and went from 8 maintainers down to 6. In the meantime, we actually had a few other good cleanup and fixes on a few more PRs merged for the runtime spec that were, now that people were like, oh, a release is going to happen. Had some good cleanup and revisiting on things. And so put up a vote for the runtime spec this week to close next week. But already we have 4 out of 6 thumbs up on it, so that's 2/3. So I'll probably just go ahead and tag that release this week and get that out. Notably, for all those keeping score, this one version 102 includes the stuff about hooks, a lot of the cleanup of hooks conversation, which was needed for the NVIDIA runtimes and run-C forks and stuff like that, because that was one of the last unresolved conversations for run-C while they were holding off on a run-C version 1.0.0. Everybody's been running a release candidate of run-C for untold number of years at this point. So we might actually see a run-C 1.0 this year, which will be curious. So that's that. So no real action needed from anybody, just letting you know. The other piece, like alluded to with what Josh talked about earlier, I'd like to see a distribution spec release candidate happen. We're sitting at a RC1, which was just something, a milestone for people to iterate at. A lot has happened since then, and I think we should start the march now towards like cleanup of knowing that this is the trajectory we're on. So to kind of clean up the working session that Josh has talked about, when you hit the when you hit the page and you see the README that looks like a skeleton copy, feel free to open PRs for that kind of stuff. That's kind of what I start expecting to see in release candidates, is just like the polish and feedback, polish type merge requests. So yeah, feel free to get that in there. I don't know, maybe in the next week or so. If we're gonna have a working session, Josh, though, I'd probably post something after we at least have like a working session of big cleanup. That's fine.
What's your suggested timeline for the RC?
I was before this, I was thinking I'd do it in the next week, but if I do it sometime next week, it's fine.
Okay. Well, yeah.
Because
let me
it's
know.
still like posting it and then waiting for the vote, so don't worry about it.
Okay. I'm about to send an email when the meeting's over, but I know Derek said he's interested. So who's ever interested in that call, let's do that soon.
Yeah, I'm good for it. Are you on? Derek's on Pacific. I'm on East.
Central, but
so
the time doesn't really mean anything to me right now.
Not like you're going to the office, huh?
No.
All right. Well, I was actually about to ping Derek anyways, because he and I've loosely said that we're going to chat about how this will relate to the Notary V2 stuff, to chat about that this week. So I need to get time on his calendar anyways. So yeah.
My calendar's open, sounds good.
Cool. All right. Then we go. Yeah, feel free to root me into that, Josh, also.
Cool. So, all
right, and that's all I have. Anybody have any last minute comments? Cool. And again, I'll maintain open invite for folks that if you want to have like a working session or even just hear the background noise. If we have some kind of working session, I'll post it to the dev@. list. And so even if you're just wanting to hear and eavesdrop on the conversation, that's fine. But I know that a lot of people are working from home that are not used to working remote. So feel free to reach out if you want to have a video chat or just participate in one, for the sake of hearing drive-by commentary. So with that, I'll give you back 5 minutes of your day. Thanks everybody for joining.
Later, folks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
See you.